had a little bit of issues, but now we're back. I'm with Susan Snow, author of Other Side of the Gun,
Hmm.
um, and she's going to tell us a little bit about her story.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the book, The Other Side of the Gun, was born out of my journey from trauma that I went through at 17. My dad was, at the time, I had a normal life, normal teenage life. My dad was a Los Angeles police detective. And on Halloween, he was actually going to testify in a case that he was a lead detective on. And I wanted to go to a party that night. So I was talking to him in the morning. He was kind of nervous, but I wanted to go to this party, and we had this conversation. And he said no, it was school night. And so I was frustrated all day long, right? My plan was that dad was going to go pick up my brother, who was 6 years old at the time, from school, come home, my mom would be home, and then that way I would convince my parents by cleaning the entire house that I should go to this party. And so I was home later in the day. My mom came home. I was getting ready, and the phone rang. I ran to go get it, thinking it was for me, and it wasn't for me. It was a lady from my brother's school. And all she said was that there was a drive by shooting and my dad was involved. And at that point, my mom had come into the room and I handed her the phone. I couldn't listen. I was trying to listen, but I couldn't hear what she was saying. But I was watching her body language, and her body language told me that it wasn't good. She got off the phone, looked at me, and said, "We're going to the school." So we jumped in the car. We drove the 7 minutes from my childhood home to my brother's church school. And when we got there, the kids on after school care, this was later in the evening, so it's after 5 o'clock, they got out on the back side of the school. So we parked and headed to the back of the school. And even though it was nighttime, the entire backside of the school looked like daylight because there were so many police car lights and an ambulance that sat in the road. And we were walking pretty quickly. We both glanced over and saw my dad's truck, so we started to run towards the truck. And as we got closer to the truck, we saw glass on the ground. And as we rounded the corner, there he was, partially covered up with a white sheet. I watched my mom drop to her knees and start screaming. And in that moment, I just stood there because I was not able to comprehend what I was seeing. I was 17 at the time. So it was not, I was not able to see what I was seeing. Instead, I hyper focused on the ambulance. And the story I told my head was, why isn't anyone helping him? I don't understand. There's an ambulance here. Where is everyone? Why aren't they trying to help him? And a little bit after that, two officers grabbed us by the arms and they escorted us back into the school and took us to an office where I sat down on a chair and my mom got taken aside by some detectives. At that moment, I didn't know where my little brother was. I didn't know if he was hurt, if he was at a hospital. I had no information whatsoever. And I was trying to process all the chaos that was going on around me. I heard two women in the office and they were speaking to one another. And the one lady said that my dad was deceased. And that's when it hit me. That's when my world shattered and it cracked in half. And I wanted to jump up out of that chair and run out of that room and far, far away from the scene as possible. And unfortunately, my entire body at that point felt like it was filled with cement and I couldn't move. Short time after, my mom came to me and she said, "I'm sending you with a neighbor." So now I know that I wanted to run out of this room and I know I wanted to run away from this situation, but there was that part of me, that child part of me, that wanted to be with my brother and my family unit with my mother. And unfortunately, I didn't get that. So I did go with the neighbor, a neighbor that had known us for many, many years, and she was trying to process everything. Our neighborhood used to be this really quiet neighborhood, and now as we were arriving to her house, it was filled with law enforcement, and there were helicopters overhead. It was a big story, so the media had ascended as well. And here she had me, who was totally inconsolable. And she was trying to process and navigate her own feelings about what was going on around, and she was an adult. So for me, I didn't know what I was going to do next. I felt it was completely surreal. And I was trying to come to terms with my neighborhood, for one, but my dad and I were very close, and my dad was a very present father, and he was my security, and he was the go-between. My mom and I didn't have a healthy relationship, so he was the voice of reason. And so not only was I dealing with losing my dad, I was also thinking to myself, how am I going to navigate my own relationship now? Like, what is this going to look like for me? It was just, there was a lot that was swirling around in my head. And unfortunately, back then in the mid 80s, there was no talk about mental health back then. So there were no resources for kids. LAPD had systems in place to support widows and widowers of the fallen, but nothing for the kids too much. And very little known about PTSD back then either. In fact, back then it was called shell shock because it was only attributed to people coming back from war. So all of the emotional things that were happening to me, I had no idea. I just felt like it was this step into losing my mind.
I was gonna say the
I,
fact that you're even here today is amazing.
I
Amazing.
I did not I didn't know how to process it by myself, and I had been dating a guy for 3 months. He was 19, and I just wanted him. I begged the neighbor. I said, please call my boyfriend. So she did, and she called him at work. And unfortunately, she didn't tell him everything. And so when he showed up, it was like typical anyone, right? He was like, get your purse, get your jacket. What hospital is he at? Where's your mom? Where's your brother? All the questions. And I just couldn't spit out the words. I couldn't say it. But the more persistent he got about us leaving, I finally blurted it out. He's gone. And he said, what do you mean he's gone? And I said, he's gone. He's not at a hospital. And I watched my 19-year-old boyfriend collapse. And we both sat and sobbed on her porch until we went back in the house. And both of us were just reeling. Like, we both had no idea what our next steps were. I didn't even know when I could go home or if I could go home. I had no idea. But when I made the decision myself to go home, I walked up the street through all of the police officers into my house with total strangers everywhere. And I could hear my mom in the distance, but nobody greeted me, nobody came to me. And so I did what kids do. I went and hid. I hid in my room. And I didn't want to talk to anybody. I didn't want to answer any questions, nothing. I just wanted to be with my boyfriend. And until he left, I didn't even leave the room. I didn't sleep that night. I peeked out my window and saw that it was daylight, so I figured I should wander out. And there were still people in my house. And there were still police officers in the front yard and the backyard. And I got to see my brother. I had heard him overnight crying in his room, so I knew he was okay physically. But I didn't get to see him until about 11 o'clock the next morning. And that's when I was able to hug him and tell him that we were going to be okay. But the next days, we continue to have this police presence. And unbeknownst to us, it came out many years later in the trial that we too were targets. So it took them 6 days to find these men that were involved. This was a planned out assassination of my father. And so I had police presence, I had bodyguards wherever I went. I went from having this normal teenage life to this. And in the process of this, I felt like I was literally spiraling and losing my mind. I had all the things that PTSD give you. I had this severe depression. I had panic attacks and anxiety. I was living in a fog, which happens a lot when grief, sets in.
Yeah, and you were still going to school at this point?
Well, kind of. I, not during this, I was in school, but I wasn't in school. I felt like I was going crazy. I felt like something had snapped inside of me and I had no control every day of the emotions that came out of me. But I was not in a place where I could advocate for myself. My mom never checked in with me because she was busy with her own stuff. And so I was just kind of, and the adults around me would tiptoe around me, like they wouldn't say anything. They wouldn't, nothing. They just look at me a certain way. And so I literally felt like I was alone on an island. And I was terrified to say the things that were going on in my head because I thought they would throw me in a loony bin and call it a day. Like, she's lost it. We're putting her in the hospital permanently.
Yeah,
And
and the adults around you weren't talking about it.
no, they weren't. And they were terrified too. My friends weren't even talking about it because they thought they would say the wrong thing and then I would break into a million pieces and they didn't want to be responsible for that.
Yeah, I can
So,
imagine the whirlwind going
yeah,
on in your head.
yeah. And, we had this humongous funeral for him and it was just, I was constantly in the media during this time. So I really didn't get a chance to grieve privately. There was always someone in my face, which made that really difficult. Even at the funeral, there were, the media was there trying to get that photo of me crying, right? The emotion
Yeah.
that sells their newspapers. And so, like I said, there wasn't a lot about mental health. And I thought, if you go to a therapist, you're nuts. Like, you're crazy. That was my kid brain back then. But when my mom came to me and she said that LAPD wanted to pay for a therapist for all three of us, my mom basically voluntold me that I was going to therapy. And I thought, okay, well, maybe this is the person. Maybe this is the adult that's going to help me feel better. And so when I did go and see this gentleman, in hindsight, unfortunately, he was not trauma competent, nor was he trauma informed. This man did not want to dip his toes in the weeds with me. Therefore, he never asked me the questions that would allow me to be vulnerable enough to tell him all the things that were going on inside of me. And every week I saw him, all we talked about was my relationship with my mother, my brother, my boyfriend, and school. Because I was a senior. And so that was about it, and every week I kept telling myself, today's the day. Today's the day I'm going to go and he's going to say something or do something and make me feel better. And it never happened. And I saw the man for a year. And after the year was up, he looked at me and said, Susan, you're a well-rounded young lady and you're going to be fine for the rest of your life. And I don't need to see you anymore. So I walked out of his office thinking, okay, I've snapped, I'm crazy, and I'm going to be dealing with this stuff for the rest of my life, so I better figure it out on my own, because even a professional can't help me. And that was my mindset.
It's understandable because there was no validation around you whatsoever.
None. And I did what a lot of people do. I created what's called an emotional mask. And I based this mask on what people told me I was. So people would say things, Susan, you're so brave. Susan, you're so strong, right? And that's what I hid behind. All of this turmoil and this stuff inside of me, I was not going to let the people on the outside see that. So I hid behind the strong Susan and the brave Susan. And I lived in fight or flight and freeze for a very long time. And at the time, I did not have the ability to see what was true around me. I was not able to see people for who they really were. And instead, I stayed in relationships with friends and friendships around me that were not healthy. And I molded myself to be what they needed me to be. In all aspects. I molded myself to be the daughter my mom needed me to be, the sister my brother needed me to be, the friend my friends needed me to be. But I wasn't my authentic self, ever. And I went through life at that time in my early adulthood, just doing what people expected me to do. I was a huge people pleaser. And so I married the boyfriend, and we're still together. And we both got married young, we think young, 21 and 24. And neither of us were ready to be married, but because that was the expectation, we had been together for so many years, we did it. And we got married and later on had kids. I had 2 kids. And at that point, I wanted to leave California. I felt like I was sick and tired of people knowing my story, which is kind of funny, right? I wanted to leave like if I left Southern California, I could leave all that behind. And I can go to another state and start over where nobody knows my story and nobody knows what happened. And that was the joke, haha, right? Because it follows you. And so when I came, we decided we were moving to Colorado, and we moved here in 97 with our 2 small children, which was a feat in itself. And I was working as a hairdresser at the time. And I worked at a salon that was close to Littleton, Colorado. I was working on April 20th of 1999. I had done a client, put her under the dryer, and went to the back room to take a quick break, turned on our little TV, and up popped the live coverage of the Columbine shootings. And I stood there and had an absolute visceral reaction. I started to sweat. I was having flashbacks, watching the scenery. It was at a school. I saw the police cars and the lights and the ambulances and the kids that were around my same age. and all this stuff. And I just felt like I was at the school where my dad was killed, and I was seeing all the things again, and I started to sweat and have a panic attack. And I had a colleague in the room, and she was looking at me like, what is happening to you? And remember, I was told I was going to be fine for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
So I
You
had
had
no
no
idea,
idea.
no clue what was happening to me either. And, but I also knew that I needed to get through the day. So I did what I always did. I put that mask back up. Everybody around me was upset, was angry, was sad, was crying, emotional, and I was stoic. I kept telling myself in my head, you know what? I don't have kids there. I don't live in the neighborhood. Like, I was trying desperately to distance myself from that situation in my head. And I said, tomorrow I'll feel better. Tomorrow will be a better day. Like, I just kept telling myself. And I finished my day and I headed to my car, and everything that I felt before came flooding back. I went into a deep depression again, only worse. I had suicidal ideation as a teen. I now had it again, only it was worse. Anxiety and panic attacks. I stopped sleeping again. And I was really struggling mentally with not wanting to feel this way anymore, just ending it. But then I had 2 babies that I couldn't leave. And so I had this struggle in my head. And my husband's a very smart man, and he recognized me spiraling. So he met me at the door one day and he said, you have 2 choices. You either get help today or I'm putting you in a hospital. And at that point, I was so terrified. I said, okay. I'll do it. Whatever you need me to do, I'll do it. And so I made an appointment. I went to a physician at first, and he put me on antidepressants because that's what they do. And then he handed me a business card of a trauma therapist. And he said, I want you to make an appointment with this therapist. And I literally laughed at him.
Did you know at the time that the therapist was a trauma therapist, or you just
It said it on her business card.
okay?
So I was like, all right, I've already put the white flag up, right? I've already surrendered. So, okay, I'll make the appointment. Because he just said, you have no choice. You have to do this.
Right.
So I said, all right. And I made the appointment, and it was this woman. And within the 3 minutes that I sat with her, I knew that this was different. She was asking me the questions that I had longed to hear since I was a teenage girl. In doing that, I felt like she was a safe space. And because she was a safe space, I was able to be vulnerable. And I was able to tell her everything that I had gone through and what I was currently dealing with. And she listened intently, and she looked at me and she said, Susan, everything you've gone through since you were 17 is normal because you have PTSD. And I thought, wait. I'm not in the military. I didn't go to war. What are you talking about? And she said, no. She said, anyone who goes through any type of trauma can experience PTSD. But what you need to know about that is PTSD is something you learn to manage. It doesn't just go away. And in that moment, I thought, oh my God, you mean I'm not crazy? I'm not broken? I can heal from this? And I had so much hope in that moment. I was so grateful to not only my husband, but to that doctor that was like, you're going to do this. I didn't make the choice. The choice made me. And she was the one that, and she knew there was a lot to unpack with me. There was a lot going on. And she didn't want to throw the kitchen sink at me. So we really dove in little at a time with the things that were the most important to address. And at the time, she asked me, what is the one thing right now that you're struggling with that's making these other things worse? And I know she knew the answer to it, but I wasn't sleeping. And rest is key for mental health. So she said, okay, great. Let's address that. And I said, okay. And I'm thinking she's going to write me a prescription for something to make me sleep. And she said, no. Have you ever journaled before? And I kind of looked at her weird and I said, journaling? What? And she said, well, some people do journaling in different ways. Some people write, some people use art, some people use music. Now people podcast. But what it is it's a mechanism to be able to get everything out of your brain so that you can center yourself and regulate your nervous system enough to get rest. And I thought, okay, well, whatever, I'll try it. She said, okay, what's your flavor? And I said, I write. And she said, great. Take a pad of paper and a pen and put it by your bed. And before you go to bed, when you start to feel your anxiousness, because that's what would happen. I would get anxious just because it was dark outside and I knew I was going to have to go to bed. Because once I closed my eyes, I went back to that place, which took me to a dark place. And then I was terrified and I'd wake back up again. And so she said, try this. And she gave me a prompt. And she said, I don't care if it makes sense. Just put whatever it is that's swirling around in your head on that pad of paper. And I said, okay. And I was so skeptical. I thought, okay, this is a little weird, but I'll try it. So the first night I did it, I got 2 hours of sleep. And I thought, wait a minute. And the second night, I got a little bit more sleep. And then the third night, I was sleeping like a baby. I woke up the next morning and it was daylight and I went, what just happened? Because I didn't realize how powerful something so simple like that could be. And it was. And the next week I came back to her and she said, how did it go? And I said, I've been sleeping for 4 days. It worked. And she said, great, keep going. Fortunately for me, this woman was like way ahead of her time. She was young. She did a lot of research and things like that. So she started incorporating things that were just starting to be on the cusp of being utilized as modalities. So she taught me EFT, so tapping techniques, using affirmations and changing my mindset around things, which would help me to regulate myself. And then we got into breath work and things along the way. And so, the big dogs didn't come till later, and that was the EMDR.
And what
But
is EMDR?
it's EMDR is it's eye rapid movement.
Okay.
Basically, what it does is it makes your brain. I did it with paddles, and they have like electronic pulses, and she takes you to that place. And the pulses go back and forth, and it's a reprogramming of your brain to see what happened in almost like a third party. Like you're not like in it, you're observing it. And when you're observing it, then you can pull yourself out of it. You know what I mean? So that's why they use it a lot with military people who have gone to war and things like that, because it's a powerful technique. And
Yeah, I had no idea.
it continues. There's so much more that has come to light with healing from trauma. But along the way is when, the books, when I got to 50, I don't know what it was about 50, but 50 years old, I drew a line in the sand and I said, this thing is going to get done. I got to write this book. And the key reason I wrote the book was because for so many years, people had my story in their head. They would tell themselves based on their own perception of how they would have handled things if that had happened to them. And a lot of the perception was not right about who I was as a person. And so I wanted people to see me authentically. And I wanted people to see that I have healing from this. And I have healed a lot from this. And on that basis, there were so many in the law enforcement community that were still filled with anger and sadness around my dad's death, even almost 40 years later, right? And so I thought, if they could see me healing, if they could see the resiliency side of me, then somehow maybe that would allow them to heal a little bit. It would give them a little hope. And as I continue to think about it, I thought, well, what about the other people out there? What about the other people that have gone through any kind of trauma? Maybe I can help them. Maybe I can give them the hope that I received. Maybe I can show them that they can heal from whatever it is that they've gone through. And the other side of it was that I wanted to show people that when you do choose to heal from trauma, you are literally taking your power back from whoever or whatever hurt you. And you're saying, I'm going to heal from this, and you can no longer have a hold over my life. And so that's where my book was born out of. And that was where my message, I'm just the messenger, right? Through writing my book, I found my purpose. I realized that there was a lot of fear in writing my book for multiple reasons. One, I was terrified that, my mom and I's relationship was already hanging on by a string. And in telling my truth, I had to tell hers. And I thought this could either break what was left or it could open a conversation. And I was going to have to be okay with either outcome. Also, with my husband, we have gone through a lot in 40 years together. And I talk about some of the things that we've dealt with in our own relationship and our own marriage. And I thought, would this bring up old wounds for him? And that was scary, right? But at the same time, it was like it needed to come out no matter what. So if it did, it did. And we would have to address it. The third fear I had was my safety. When you've already been a target and two men were still incarcerated, there's always that little thing in the back of your head that, will there be any retaliation for me coming out and speaking again, putting this story out again? But every time those fears came to me, I had to step back and think about those faceless people out there that needed to hear this message and needed to see the healing and needed to have the hope. And so because of that, it would allow me to bulldoze through that fear. And that became my purpose. The faceless people out there became the purpose for me. The message became the purpose for me. So, as terrifying as it was to put my entire life out there in the ether, it was worth it. Because if I can connect to one person and give them any kind of hope in their healing, then everything is worth it.
I love that. Your resiliency is just, I'm in awe of it.
Thank you.
Very resilient. Where can our audience find your book?
So my book is on Amazon. It's in paperback form. It's on Kindle. So if you're a Kindle Unlimited person, you can read it for free. I also did an audiobook. I narrated it myself in a studio. That was a whole nother journey. And so it is on Audible as well.
And you also have a website, Susan Speaks.
I do. So yeah. So I am a trauma resiliency life coach. I do a free 40-minute discovery call to anyone. And you can go through my website, which is susansnowspeaks.com. It has all the information, my one-stop shop. It has all the information about my speaking, my coaching, and some information about my book.
Awesome. Is there anything else you want to tell the viewers today? You've been amazing. I'm just in awe of your
No, thank
story.
you.
Thank you so much for sharing the space with me.
Absolutely. And just so you know, today is my 100th podcast appearance. So,
You have no idea how nervous I was.
so you're my 100th. Yay!
Awesome.
Here's what I'm going to leave your listeners. There's two key things that I want to leave them with. One, you're not alone. There's hope. And your healing is your healing. It's not your therapist's healing. So it is very important for you to align yourself with someone who understands your type of trauma. Because you can't lump trauma into one big group. Everybody's trauma is different. And because of that, your therapist needs to understand your type of trauma because there's different modalities and there's a different journey for each one of these traumas. So interview your therapist. Make sure that they understand and that this is their key. This is what they help people heal with. Because if you don't, you won't feel safe enough to be vulnerable. And vulnerability is key to healing. As scary as it is, your therapist is the most intimate relationship you have besides a partner. And so you have to have that safe space. So I firmly believe that if I hadn't had that woman give me that safe space, that last therapist that I had, I would have never started my healing journey. And I would have continued on that path of feeling like I was nuts and crazy. So if you choose to take this path and you choose to heal from whatever it is, just know that once you find your person, and it might take you a few times, and that's okay. Not having the trauma holding over your head and that pain is priceless, and it will change your life. So,
Thank you so much, Susan.
you're welcome. I really hope that I'm able to connect with somebody, one of your listeners.
I think that I know that you will. I've never been through anything like that, and I'm just in awe, and it's just inspiring. It's just so inspiring.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
Yes. Have a good day.
You too.